making an LLM learn from your data, which is not as big or as wide as the internet's data,
Mm-hmm.
that's a hard problem, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not all LLMs are capable of it. Each,
Right.
different LLMs have like different pros, cons,
And
whether
characteristics.
data can be sent to the LLM or whether you need to build something on prem. What are the positives and negatives of different models being used, right? So, but it's primarily, everybody wants to sort of, like I said, marry the LLMs to the business. The more
Mm-hmm.
technical term is how do you marry these models to your data.
Hi, friends, and welcome to this exciting episode of Leading with Data, where I talk to industry leaders, industry thought leaders in AI and ML, and bring their perspective for you. Today, I have with me Rohan Rao, who is currently a principal data scientist at H2O.ai. But that's not the reason why I met Rohan. So, Rohan and I go a long way back, and I met him for the first time in 2017 when he started winning competitions after competitions on analytics with Vidhya. He's also a Kaggle Grandmaster and a 9-time Indian Sudoku Champion. He's a brilliant data scientist and someone I always enjoyed to talk to. More recently, he was at Data Hack Summit where he presented a talk about how to find the right LLM for your business needs. And that's what we'll talk to him about in this session. So let's get started.
Yes, thanks a lot, Kunal. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, like you said, I think we go back really long way, but it's always glad to keep coming back, being part of Analytics Vidya in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And yeah, as recently as the Data Hack Summit that was held, I think that was a fantastic event, and it was great to meet you and the entire team.
Great, great. So, Rohan, just want to quickly go back to uh, how you started in data science, and among so many competitions you have obviously participated in one. Which one was the standout competition for you, and why?
Yeah, so I've been, competing, coding, participating in hackathons, competitions for, I think, nearly a decade now. Uh,
Correct.
and I've done, competitions across a lot of different platforms. Like you mentioned, I was quite active on Analytics Vidya, during the earlier times when there were frequently held hackathons, and I won many of them. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to really sort of pick one, but maybe
Mhm.
one that comes to my mind was uh, I don't remember the exact name, but it was held in October.
Mhm.
I think the name of the hackathon on Analytics Vidya was also
Okay.
themed on
That is
October. I think October,
yeah.
October Fest or
Noctober. Correct. Yeah.
October,
Noctober.
yeah, in October.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I remember about that competition was so there were the prior two hackathons. I think one was held in July and one in August. So I stood
Mhm.
first in both of them. And
Right.
internally in the community we were discussing, and somebody challenged me saying that, hey, can you do a hat trick on AV? And I was
Okay.
like, yeah, I mean that might be cool.
Mhm.
And during those times, Sudhile, or who's commonly
Okay.
known as
Yeah.
SRK in the community, I think he was giving a tough fight.
Yeah.
So what I did was I really wanted to win, the October hackathon. So very cleverly, I decided to team up with Sudhile, taking out the competition, and we really did well, and we ended up finishing
Yeah.
first. So I got my
Yeah.
hat trick, and that's one kind of memorable one.
Interesting. So it was chess along with data science skills.
Yeah, I mean,
Interesting.
you do what you need to do to win, So, so within the rules, within the platform and uh,
Correct.
the the sort of hackathon, we kind of managed to come out on top. So that was quite nice.
Correct, correct. And this was the time when ML and then DL obviously was at the forefront of technology or algorithms or whatever the community was using. Today, obviously, a lot has changed in the last couple of years, right? So, just want to know, how are you seeing these trends, and then what how are you what's your perspective of all the developments which has happened in the last couple of years in generative AI or AI in general?
Yeah, so let me start a little bit, further back. So when I
Hmm.
look at, my experience over the last decade, so there have been, phases where not much has happened. Things
Hmm.
are kind of slowly developing, progressing, building, and there have always been these, one-off
Iceberg.
innovative things which have come.
Correct.
Yeah, which is
Hmm.
like dramatically changed almost like everything in the field. And
Correct.
literally, even as a data scientist, having practiced, done so much work over the years, I think each time we have to level up, we have to relearn a lot of the aspects of modeling or workflows or even libraries being used. So that's kind of it. It frequently happens. A couple of
Right.
examples that I remember is when XGBoost first came, maybe in
Yeah.
2014 or so, it
Hmm.
suddenly it killed logistic regression,
Random
random
forest.
forest,
Yeah.
all the really really traditional old school methods. Almost
Hmm.
nobody kind of started using them on hackathons, Kaggle competitions, and even
Correct.
actual when we ended up building solutions for businesses as part of my
Hmm.
work, we kind of just completely moved to XGBoost, and then came Light GBM, and a few years
Right.
later came Cat Boost. Now there are like many more different kinds of gradient boosting or automels available. The second that I remember is when Google released a BERT. I think
Right.
that really changed the way people looked at and people solved NLP problems. Right.
Right.
So suddenly everything, and BERT was linked with then transformers and then Hugging Face as a
Yeah.
library and a
It's a
community
library. Yeah.
developed, and that really democratized NLP to a very large extent. And
Right.
all the traditional entity extraction and TF-IDF, those approaches kind of
Cloning.
went down the drain.
Yeah.
Everyone started using PyTorch and TensorFlow and
Correct.
coming up with all these deep learning workflows. And then finally, when you look at the last couple of years, I think the tipping point was when OpenAI released ChatGPT,
Yeah.
as a general availability product for an end user. Just kind of sign in, and you have like a chatbot as your personal assistant working for you. But
Right.
I think the key was the way they were able to train it to perform, significantly more
Right.
accurately compared to the chatbots that we have seen maybe 5 years back.
Correct. Correct.
And now with the capabilities and the way it's expanded and probably blown out of proportions, I think LLMs have become really powerful. And
Yeah.
Gen AI in general as a space is starting to get very widely adopted, and there is so much of innovative stuff happening. So it's just wonderful to see, and it's
Mhm.
also nice and fun to be part of the system and the space.
Interesting. And the other interesting bit is, GPT, Chat GPT came out, and then GPT-4 was released like within 6 months, and it was remarkably better compared to what 3.5 was. Uh, and it has continued to evolve. Multimodal capabilities have come in, but purely from your perspective, how do you see, let's say, next few years? Do you see, let's say, incremental changes, what we have seen, let's say, over the last now 1.5 years since Chat GPT-4 came out, or you would still expect some large leaps as we saw from, let's say, 3.5 to 4?
Yeah, so if you look at the lifespan of most of these models, you'll always see like one huge spike or a cliff or a jump, which is I think what we saw with ChatGPT or GPT-4. And typically what happens is it will kind of taper down. The curve becomes lesser steep with time.
Mhm.
It's always incrementally harder to sort of improve the
Mhm.
performance of I think any machine learning model. Like
Mhm.
even if you've reached from you use any model for any business use case, you can very quickly use like an auto ml or some ready-made solution. You hit like let's say 75-80%, you do some iteration, some improvement, you move it to 85, and then suddenly you realize, oh, now every 1% increase gets like much harder to do. So I think for these llms also, I think it's going to be similar, especially considering that most of these llms, they've already learned like almost the entire data on the internet.
Internet
So you need
data.
to think about like what more is there for them to learn also, right? There has to
Correct.
be like new data generated, or there needs to be sources of data which is let's say not publicly
Exactly.
available, and really large sources of data, right? It's not
Correct.
just a few thousand documents here and there. So while there is kind of work being happening,
Mhm.
there is evaluation being done to see and understand, okay, even the models that we have today live, where are they failing, right? Or where
Yeah.
are they subperforming, and what can we do to even with the constraint of the data and resources we have, how do we improve or increase their performance? So a lot of work is happening, but I think we've reached, I would say we have reached a stage where the plateauing is going to begin, and it'll be
Mhm.
interesting to see when or where or how the next bump or the next jump is going to come from.
Going to come from. Uh, but the only, I think, difference with this cycle is, the scaling laws continue to work brilliantly as we are kind of adding more data and throwing more compute uh, at these models. So I think data is definitely going to become a constraint, which you mentioned. Uh, uh, but I mean, there is still the feeling that if we can figure out, maybe synthetic data could be one option, or if there is a breakout that happens there, then you would continue to hopefully see improvements.
Yeah, I'm sure, even on the resources, I think the kind of computational resources we had maybe even 10 years back is like
Uh,
much lesser than what we have today, right?
yeah,
Probably unless Nvidia stock prices fall.
yeah.
But until then, there's just not just the amount of resources, it's also the ease at which any data scientist sitting at home can get access to like
Correct.
a multi GPU server, right? You just take a couple of hours and you can spawn something on one of these clouds, or you have uh, some of these companies who provide free resources to do research or to do any work that you want in the field. So I think it's getting a lot easier for people to innovate, build, try out ideas,
Yeah.
while some of these large models are really large and they require like a really lot of compute to even run simple inference. But I think there is a lot that a data scientist can do sitting at home with
Correct.
newer, smaller, more open source models, which literally you can now run from your laptop to a fairly decent amount of accuracy. So
Right.
yeah, resources has also become far more
But
easier and let's say democratized compared
yeah.
to a decade ago.
No, I remember, so 2018, I had asked one of my friends to actually carry a NVIDIA GPU. So NVIDIA had launched Titan X at that time, and I got that quoted, and within a few years, it was like I could hire something on cloud, which would be actually better. But so that is so true.
It's still
So
tough. It's still tough. It's not as easy to acquire GPUs on prem,
right
which
on
is why it's
prem.
slightly easier on cloud. But obviously,
Correct.
it's costlier as well. And in the long run, probably having like a local setup is more efficient.
Correct. Yeah. So, from a and then you're also principal data scientist at H2, and probably you interact with a lot of businesses there. How are businesses kind of adopting to Gen AI and LLMs? And then again, referring back to your talk, which was how do businesses kind of choose the right LLMs? Can you share, what are you seeing in your interactions with uh, clients, businesses, or overall industry in general?
Sure. So, so at H2O, I think one advantage which we have is we are not domain specific. We have customers across a lot of different domains, whether it's banking, retail, financial services, government, manufacturing, logistics, healthcare. You name
Mhm.
an industry, and there are problems to solve. And I think almost every company in the world is currently in that phase where they've seen what you know LLMs are capable of.
Mhm.
But what I think companies are trying to do is they are trying to now marry the two. So they understand what are their business problems, and they everybody kind of has seen what LLMs are capable of doing or solving. Now it's really about marrying the two, right? So how
Mhm.
can these LLMs or the capabilities that LLMs have, how can it help or boost the business that you are in? It's not as simple as any problem that you have in your business, you just ask an LLM and magically it will give you the solution. So
Right.
it's really about understanding what these LLMs are capable of doing. How do they integrate with your data, your systems? What is the format in which you need to input your data or your queries to get the outputs in a format or in a way in which it actually helps your business, right? So
Mhm.
I think most of the projects that we are currently working on, I think a majority of those firstly are in the GenAI space, right? I think
Okay.
everybody wants to kind of do this. Everybody is
Mhm.
trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this?
Yeah,
And it's going to be an iterative process. It's
of course.
it's
Mhm.
still it's a very new nascent sort of stage.
All right.
While people talk about like rapid growth, rapid progress, when we talk to customers and when we really see the nitty gritty details of, okay, how are these models actually being deployed or implemented for business problems, it's
Right.
still a much bigger problem than kind of what we see outside, right? Because
Correct.
there are a lot of aspects of the mod or the entire solution to look at
Yeah.
before
Mhm.
actually building something which at the end of the day helps your business.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, there's a lot of work happening, a lot of interesting problems, projects. I think a lot of the business problems are kind of same,
Mhm.
but people are exploring how do they use GenAI or how do they use these new LLMs to solve those problems in a better way than traditional approaches in the past.
Mhm.
So we are
Interesting.
kind of in that phase.
Interesting. And what are the most common use cases you've seen, across all of these sectors?
So I think every customer has like one question, okay, which is how can an LLM learn my data?
My data. So
Right?
my
So the
intelligence
LLM
data.
knows, yeah, the LLM knows the data of the internet, right? But
Right.
when you want to build something for your business, you have a lot of internal data, right, which is not on the internet, that's specific to your business, your company. And I think a
Correct.
majority of problem statements would tend to use or consume that data in some way to help the
Mhm.
business, right? It's very
Right.
natural, right? If you're doing, even if you look
Yeah.
at any traditional, ML solution that you build in a company, it's basically on your data that you want to build some churn model or sales forecasting or any of these sort of predicted workflows that are there. It's primarily based on that company's data, right? So
Correct.
LLMs are really powerful on generic data, right? That's kind of
Mhm.
everybody has accepted it and actually experienced it. But making an LLM learn from your data, which is not as big or as wide as the internet's
Right.
data, that's
Mhm.
a hard problem, right? And
Mhm.
not all LLMs are capable of it. Each,
Right.
different LLMs have like different pros, cons,
And
whether
characteristics.
data can be sent to the LLM or whether you need to build something on prem. What are the positives and negatives of different models being used, right? So, but it's primarily, everybody wants to sort of, like I said, marry the LLMs to the business. The more
Mhm.
technical term is how do you marry these models to your data, right? And
Right.
that's I think a lot of work. Even we as a company at H2O, I think probably more than 60-70% of our work these days is essentially helping businesses use the power of LLMs on their proprietary private data. So that's very interesting. That's going to grow. There's
Mhm.
going to be more asks on that front,
Correct.
and it'll be interesting to see how the space evolves from here.
Right. And you shared a, very nice framework in your talk about how can someone select what's the right LLM and then depending on the problem. So can you elaborate a bit more on that framework and the parameters which you had shared in terms of, let's say I have a business problem and I want to evaluate whether it's right to use LLMs here, and if they are, then how do I select which one is the right one, and how do I go about solving that problem?
Yeah, so I think the firstly the idea of this topic and the talk that I'd given came from my personal experience of talking and discussing with customers.
Hmm.
Now, when customers come to a GenAI expert, like H2O, or even people like me who are hands-on building solutions in the industry,
Hmm.
I think a lot of them come from like a very business oriented or a non-technical background.
Right.
And for them, the initial thought is like, LLMs are like magic, I have this data, I have this problem statement. Oh, let me just put it in an LLM and it gets solved.
Good answers.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but actually it's not as simple as that. Right. And
Correct.
what happened is we found that, with every customer, we were kind of spending a lot of time and just educating them of
Correct.
what exactly are LLMs capable of doing and what are they capable of not doing, right?
Not doing
And both sides are important,
it. Right.
right? So because of this constant kind of initial conversation we had, we kind of built kind of a framework which I kind of structured it, which in a way which suited the way I talk to customers or the way I share it with the community and with folks. And that's
Hmm.
where my entire presentation and talk at Data Hack Summit this year was themed on. So essentially the crux is you have business problems, you have LLMs. Okay, the the goal is obviously the to kind of marry the two, but the question is how do you do it? Like, what are the things that you need to look at to figure out which LLM or which business problem to actually work on?
Hmm.
Now, let's start with the LLM side. There is like rapid progress being happening almost every week, if not every day. there is like, some new LLM that's launched,
Correct.
open source, this
Yeah.
size, on some leaderboard you'll
So
get
many
some metrics,
parameters.
performance.
Yeah.
Like, as a person who just wants to solve a business problem using an LLM, it gets a little overwhelming. You
Yes.
can get lost in the space. There's like 5.3, there's GPT 4.0, there's Claude,
Yes.
there is
Reflection came out
proprietary
last week.
LLMs. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's Llama, there's open source ones. Like,
Correct.
how does a person really decide or choose, okay, which is the LLM that really suits me or my business, right? And that is the kind of framework I built. So
Mm-hmm.
the so my framework had 12 points. Let me see if I can remember all. Maybe I might miss a couple, but very
Mm-hmm.
quickly to list them down. So the main aspects to research and look at to figure out whether an LLM is right for your business or not is, so first is, I think, capability. So
Mm-hmm.
that's essentially, based on the kind of business problems you want to solve, whether an LLM is really capable of doing it or not. An
Mm-hmm.
LLM can't solve like everything under the world. If you have like a logistics issue because of two of your suppliers fighting on some land dispute, an LLM is not really going to solve that problem,
That
right? So
problem.
it's first, I think, you need to understand whether an LLM is even the right solution to your problem. Then comes things like the tech stack that's used, the accuracy of the model on your data. There is scalability. There
Mm-hmm.
is whether you have the right data for your LLM or not. There is cost. Okay, cost I mentioned. Then there is monitoring, whether you
Correct.
can monitor the solution that you build. Then
Mm-hmm.
there are some stuff on the engineering side, which is, can you scale your LLM or not?
Yeah.
Right? How do you deploy this LLM in production? Okay, so if you use like proprietary ones like Claude or ChatGPT, they have APIs and it's relatively easier to do. But when you
Yeah.
are using open source ones, while it's easy to say that, oh, let's use open source, it's cheaper, and we don't have to pay per token, but you also need to understand that, okay, then you need to set up your infrastructure, right?
Correct.
Somebody has to manage all those resources, compute. There is latency. Different models have different speeds of inferencing, right? So the first few are, the analytics, the data science part of it, business and data
Mm-hmm.
science. These, the scalability, infrastructure, latency, these are the engineering side of it. And finally, the last bit, which is also equally important, which I think a lot of people initially don't really think of, is the legal side of it. There is
Right.
compliance, there is privacy, there is security, right? Is the data stored in a secure environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
LLMs, if you integrate or if you work with your data, it should be able to hide or mask confidential information, right? You don't want an LLM to give one customer some information about another customer, right?
Yeah.
So there are like lot of these little bits and pieces which you have to take care of, or you have to research or understand, or actually evaluate against these different LLMs or options that you have, to ultimately decide, okay, which is the right LLM for your business, right? And very often, probably like almost surely, the first LLM that you might have a gut feeling about is not going to be the one that will work for you,
Okay.
right? And
Interesting.
so even when you kind of explore and understand this framework, it helps you also understand the pros, the cons, why and how LLMs are so different, and
Yeah.
ultimately, okay, which ones kind of suit your business the best. So that was kind of the crux of my talk, my experience, and as well as, I think, how most problems in the space are being approached today.
Interesting. So just double clicking on some of the aspects which you mentioned. So first one is about the business problem, and do you see, for example, same set of problems, and I think you also mentioned it briefly, can also be solved using Gen AI, right? So I mean, publicly look at, let's say, Google search versus what Perplexity is doing. They're trying to address the same information challenge, but in two very, very different ways, right? So as a business user, that's one of the challenges have seen people facing, that they're not able to decide whether a Gen AI is the right way to solve it, or let's say some of the traditional algorithms are better suited. And then I think for some cases it's I think easy, but there is still that gray line and convergence, and all of this is obviously against a backdrop of very rapid development happening in the domain. So how do you navigate this? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the approach for that is also similar to how the field has evolved.
Hmm.
Traditionally, initially, like even like 10 years back, we were primarily, most problems used to be, okay, how do we structure this in a way where we can put it into logistic regression, right?
Right.
And logistic regression can be deployed in this way. You can get the weights, you can interpret the model in this way, and you get
Hmm.
some performance or accuracy. Then
Hmm.
something new came. There came gradient boosting. There came
Right.
these more complex models, harder to
Hmm.
understand but more accurate, right?
Hmm.
So the typical approach is you have to experiment, right? There is
Right.
no hard and fast rule that this is going to work for this problem or this data, or something else may or may not work. It's really
Hmm.
about very quickly trying, iterating, testing, and evaluating, right?
Hmm.
So many businesses found that gradient boosting models, oh, they do seem to outperform logistic regression, right? But they
Hmm.
are less interpretable, or they are harder to interpret. Similarly, the way a logistic regression is put in production is different from a way, let's say, an
Correct.
XGBoost is put in production. Okay,
Correct.
so how do we monitor, and what are the resources required for each? The same
Hmm.
is true for today when people evaluate traditional approaches. Let's say now XGBoost is traditional, and Gen AI is like the new fancy way
You
of solving
solving.
problems. But maybe I can give a quick example of the hack panel that we had done at the
Right.
conference. So one
Hmm.
of the problem statements was entity extraction. So there are a
Right.
lot of libraries, traditional libraries available to do
Yeah.
entity extraction, right? Where you can extract entities, or you can do topic modeling, where you can find
Correct.
out topics from a bunch of essays. Now those are traditional ways. The same thing can be done with LLMs as well, right? You
Correct.
put in your essays and you say that extract entities, or find out the top topics that are there. And how do you
Correct.
really evaluate the two? Right? You have to
Yeah.
compare them. Right? There is no other way. For some businesses and some probably data sets, the traditional may work easier, better. They
Hmm.
work good enough, easier to deploy, manage. But maybe for other businesses, the LLMs are performing better, maybe slightly harder to put in production. But I think it's getting easier with time.
Yeah.
And if for different companies, for different problems, there's going to be different solutions that's going to work. One classic example I give to a lot of people is, so when you look at two big retailers, let's say
Hmm.
Amazon and Flipkart, or maybe even Walmart or Target, any of these large retail stores, they all have their main model is the recommendations models that they want to build, to recommend products to users, right? To
Hmm.
increase retention, to increase overall sales, and so on. The recommendation algorithm at Amazon, you just cannot use it at Flipkart, which you just cannot use it at Walmart. They're just like so different. The data is so different. The kind of models used are so different. The entire pipeline is so different. Even though
Hmm.
it's kind of the same domain, the same business problem, it
Yeah.
significantly varies. right? I think the
Right.
same is true for almost any business.
Right. Interesting. And from a again, I think engineering is obviously a more involved topic, but if you have to talk about broad paradigms in terms of how people are building the engineering around these LLMs, one you mentioned is you could go and use APIs from these let's say largely available models from OpenAI or Claude, and the other is hosting your own LLMs, open source LLMs. Again, do you see a threshold point or areas where one approach becomes better than the other, or again, how would you recommend thinking about that?
Yeah, it's probably, if first is LLM capability, I would say LLM capability and accuracy. The second
Mhm.
most, ask or question that we get is, hey, should we use proprietary LLMs or should we use open source ones, right? And the
Right.
answer
Mhm.
is not as easy as, hey, just use open source, it's cheaper. Like almost all business folks I've spoken to, or even engineering, CTOs, people I've spoken to, they all, first want to use open source LLMs because it's cheaper. So I think, yeah, the part that they miss out is, it's cheaper when you just look at the, uh, the,
Inference.
yeah, just kind of the inference side of it, exactly. Yeah, because you feel that, oh, I'm hosting it on my server, right, which might be something on prem, so there's no
Right.
recurring cost. It just might
Yeah.
be like a one time setup, right? But then there are a lot of things around it, right? So for example, ChatGPT is a company that's kind of
Mhm.
working on, the models, the APIs, their servers full time, right? And
Right.
as part of any subscription, or if you kind of buy credits, or if you use their enterprise APIs, it's their job to keep things like 100% uptime, or
Right.
whatever, 99.99% uptime. They'll
Yeah.
ensure that the servers don't go down. They'll ensure that for the models coming in the future, they'll have the right compute resources available, right? So
Right.
all these complexities now come in when you are building it on prem, right? Okay, maybe
Yeah.
today it costs whatever, some X dollars to set it up one time. But let's say 6 months later there is a new fancier larger model that you want to
Right.
use, right? You have to scale up your resources, right?
Right.
And scale up is not just you click a button, right? You
Right.
have to have, like,
Procure the
that DevOps
hardware.
team give those resources, have those GPUs. You may find that after 1 year the GPUs that you're using is outdated, right? Then you need to buy more GPUs. So
Yeah.
suddenly the costs are not as simple as just a one time setup. There is
Hmm.
monitoring costs, there is inferencing costs. So another aspect is latency.
Right.
So proprietary services, they will ensure the APIs have latencies, they will have auto scaling, right? But on prem, initially you might just set up two GPUs or whatever X number of servers. Now
Hmm.
as and when you get more customers or more people use your LLM services, you may find that, oh, the latency is going down, I need to add more servers, right? So the cost kind of is it's much more variable than I
Yeah.
think what people think, right?
Mm.
So I think that's kind of a piece which uh, the data science folks kind of work with the engineering teams to evaluate and figure out which is really going to be beneficial long term.
Yeah.
And personally, what I have seen is, even though a lot of teams start or are inclined towards open source,
Hmm.
many of them ultimately end up moving to one of these API services, because it's far easier to do. It is
Yeah.
costlier, no doubt about that, but I think it
Hmm.
takes care of a lot of other headaches. right?
Right.
And it's just considered as another stream of expenses. Just like if you have running servers all the time, that's
On the cloud. Yeah.
let's say, yeah, hosting your web page, or if you have some data storage services which store your data. Now this essentially just becomes another um, what do you call, cost
Expense.
item in your overall expenses, right?
Correct.
And what you really need to evaluate is, at the end of the day or at the end of the project, if it's adding x dollars to the business and your
Right.
cost is y dollars, you just need to have x minus y as positive.
Correct.
That's when you actually add value to business, right? It doesn't matter accuracy of models, or how big is your ensemble, or whether you're doing some awesome prompt engineering. At the end of it, your net to the business has to be
Correct.
positive. Only then it really makes sense. So it's
Correct.
all intertwined, interconnected. It's, while there are, as I said earlier also, there is the business data science piece, there is the
Yeah.
engineering piece, and there is the legal piece. But I
Right.
think the framework that I have, and in general when LLMs are evaluated, I think it all kind of, you have to evaluate and check them together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, in fact, it's interesting. So whenever I get asked this question, I usually tell people go with a proprietary first thing, see whether it's adding to the business case, etc. So for prototyping, I think that's clearly a lot
Yeah.
more easier, and then you could set it up very quickly without getting into the large investments. And once you're convinced about the value, and honestly, more often than not, people come back and say, yeah, we are far away from where we thought we would be. And then, for example, internally we were trying to use LLMs in our one of the use cases, which was, when we
Mhm.
send emails to people about our, let's say, programs, can we personalize it based on person's browsing history on analytics with that, right? So you came and read a
Mhm.
article about ChatGPT, so the mail would start with, "Hey, you read this topic. Here are some next steps, etc." And logically, we felt that this is going to be a big jump. It is going to increase our open rates and click rates, and then it should result into better business. uh, it didn't it just yielded 10% increase, and we were
Mhm.
then evaluating whether the cost of incrementally creating these emails versus the ROI, does it still make sense? But at the surface it would make so much sense. And thankfully we used proprietary algorithms and didn't go down the route that let's set up our own rig and set up our
Yeah.
own instances. So yeah, that's at least what has been our experience in that sense. So
Yeah. Yeah, so in fact, even traditionally, if you look at any machine learning problem in companies, we
mhm,
used to have this uh, popular phrase that we used. You think up of 100 problems, you work on 10,
right.
you build two. Oh no, you build five, you put two in production, and maybe one will succeed. So
Yeah,
it's like that. It's a big funnel, right? So, and
correct.
literally we are looking at 100 problems, and like
Yeah.
one may succeed. So it's still like, yeah, a lot of experimenting. And yeah, like you said, right, sometimes the results may just not make business sense, in which case
Correct.
everything is working. It's everything is literally working, it's solving the
Yeah.
problem, it's improving your numbers, but at the end
Correct.
it's not making business sense, so it
Correct.
may just
Yeah.
not work.
Yeah, interesting. And finally, on the responsible AI side, and then some of these concerns that you could prompt models to get information which ideally they should not be kind of giving out, and then the risks around the telling customers something, so hallucination coming in and leaving customers with the wrong risk. Uh, any frameworks you can kind of share, or anything which you have seen? I think in some domains it's really easy. So healthcare, you can't really have any hallucinations, etc. But overall, how are you seeing, and is there a framework you can share over there?
Yeah, so this is yeah, it becomes quite a, I think, critical piece
Yeah.
to to really figure out whether an LLM based pipeline is really going to work in uh, in the business or in the long run or not. It's hard, it's hard. It's not. So I think one difficulty or one challenge I think a lot of folks are facing is LLMs are powerful, no doubt, and they are powerful because they know insane amount of information.
Worldly knowledge.
There are always going to be bad actors. There are going to be people who abuse these LLMs. They would want to use it for uh, for negative activities. And as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. I
Responsibility.
think a
Yeah.
lot of work is being put into to control and limit the the abuse of these LLMs.
Correct.
It's it's still, I would say, tough. It's a gray area at times, uh,
Yeah.
because the I mean LLMs they're too vast. You can't capture firstly everything. You
Yeah.
In fact there are a lot of abusive stuff which we may not even know today, which
Not
people
true.
might discover or encounter
Correct.
in the
Like
months coming forward, right? So
the
that's,
of Cambridge Analytica coming out
yeah,
down the line.
exactly. Like you do, I mean they are like probabilistic in nature. They are random to a lot of extent, right?
Yeah.
It's not that every time you ask an LLM you get the same output,
Same
right? So
output.
they're not even very deterministic, which becomes much more harder to solve
Correct.
the responsible bit of these models. But there are, so I mean, frameworks, personally we have not worked too much on them. There are
Mhm.
guardrails. There is Llama has its own. OpenAI internally, they have
Yeah.
their own guardrails.
Yeah.
Claude has most of the proprietary ones. I think there's constant work happening. They are improving.
Mhm.
Open source ones, some of the big ones have. Not everyone does.
Yeah.
So it's a little phasey there as well. And I think this is something which I think is going to be one of the biggest pieces to solve for really widespread adoption of LLMs.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to be possible to
Mhm.
100% solve this from a technological and data science viewpoint. I
Yeah.
think it also is going to come in the form of government policies. It's going to come in the form of AI regulations, which
Right.
is why a lot of countries around the world, they are now seriously and actively discussing, researching, trying to figure
Yeah.
out what should be the so-called AI governance, which
Correct.
should balance the the encouragement to do innovation in the field
Right.
along with controls over the bad usage of these powerful tools, right?
Yeah.
And I mean with time I think people are not going to stop making them more accurate and powerful. They
That
are
is
going to
true.
get better, they are going to get smarter.
Yeah.
And I think just like any industry which has uh, these bad actors or folks who kind of want to use these tools for non-good purposes, there are going to be restrictions, constraints in some way. How massive, how big, how constraining they are, I think we don't know today.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's, I think we have to wait and see for that.
Mhm. And finally, you now see a lot of talk happening about agents and use of agents to solve, let's say, business problems. Uh, what's your take on it? How excited are you, let's say, on a scale of 1 to 10 about agents, and how do you see that playing out?
So on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say I'm on 11.
Okay.
No, so yeah, it comes a little bit from personal experience as well. I think so. One benefit of some of these, I would say, uh, side innovations happening in the entire GenAI space is, while these language models are really vast, they have so much of information. I think it's now getting easier, and people are able to understand how they can use this to solve more micro tasks. Like
Right.
having agents becomes kind of specialized in one or two particular things, right? So
Hmm.
recently I remember there was one competition on, I think, Kaggle. It was
Hmm.
on Maths Olympiad. So having an
Okay.
LLM participate in a Maths Olympiad, right?
Right.
So now this kind of LLM, it need not have information about government policies or healthcare, right? So you can kind of purge all of that and have like a much smaller model and fine
Hmm.
tune it on, let's say, just solving math problems,
Hmm.
right? And we found that such specialized models are much better and more accurate in, they have one job, they have one task, given like a math problem, what's the
Solving.
final answer, right? Just solve it.
Correct.
Like what's the final,
Mhm.
integer or float, what's the value of x for an
Mhm.
complex algebraic expression. And it becomes very accurate in these things, way more accurate than even GPT-4o or the top LLMs today. So I
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
what people are kind of working or managing to do is kind of breaking down these large LLMs in solving these individual small uh, kind of problems in a larger solution, right? And
Right.
then figuring out, okay, I have one agent that does math problems. Let's say I have
Mhm.
one agent that is very good at maybe selling a product of my company to a
Storytelling
random
plus.
customer,
Mm.
yeah, who comes on my homepage. Or I have an
Mhm.
agent who is, let's say, really good for as a support chatbot, right? If a
Mhm.
customer has a complaint or a query, right? So I think people are getting good or figuring out ways in which these small components can be built. And yeah, it's basically how do we combine or get all of them together in a larger Gen AI solution. So I think we are at that. I'm very pro, very bullish on building these agents and exploring and using them to solve these problems. And I think we are at a very early stage at there, and we are going to see a lot more happening.
Interesting. And so, if you build a model specializing in a domain, I think that makes tremendous sense the way you explain. But a lot of people are, for example, at the back, just using a chat GPT. It's essentially a prompt saying, check this particular copy, whether it is right or not, and just act. I mean, so the interface has changed, but in a lot of ways, I still feel that it's still the same universal model working at the back. In those scenarios, agents would not have any meaningful advantage over just LLM applications in that sense, right? Except for maybe iteratively solving that. That's probably the
Yeah,
only.
I mean, these are just like chat GPT wrappers essentially,
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I mean, so yeah, even I've come across a lot of products companies who
Yeah.
who kind of showcase that they're doing something fancy, but at the
Yeah.
back end it's very clear that it's just a chat GPT wrapper or a Claude wrapper with some custom instruction given, and
Yeah.
they are trying to use that to say that they are experts.
Mhm.
It as a obviously, as an end user, it's hard to detect whether
Correct.
that's really the case or not. But my belief is, for the short term, they may survive, but it's not going to work in the long run.
Okay, great,
They
great.
will die out. Yeah,
Mhm. Sure. And
that's my.
any agents you have built personally which you are using in your day-to-day work as of now?
Yeah, so I have one custom personal agent that I've built. It's
Mhm.
basically in the Web3 space.
Okay,
So
okay.
it kind of every day fetches a lot of information from different blockchains, and if it
Mhm.
finds some very interesting insights, or if it finds some outliers or some trends in the data which is not normal, it kind of flags
Mhm.
it. So I mean,
Okay.
it's just a personal
Yeah,
hobby,
I know
fun
you.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you were deep into blockchain a few years back. I remember that.
Yeah, I still
Uh,
do. I still do. In fact, recently I even invested in one startup. So
okay,
yeah,
interesting.
still active in the blockchain space.
Wow, interesting. Great, great. Thanks a lot, Rohan, for sharing your perspective and sharing all the thoughts and frameworks. Towards the end of each of these podcasts, we do a few rapid fire questions with our guests, right? And then
Sure,
so
sure.
whatever comes top of the mind. Uh, so your view on California laws, laws which are being discussed in California, are you pro
Yeah,
or
so
against?
I'll not comment until they are passed.
Okay.
It's going to
Then I
change.
know which
That's why.
side you. Then I know which side you are.
Okay, not super pro yet.
Okay, great. What does your typical day look like?
Yeah, it's fairly easy now. Like morning, just wake up, get ready. Work is 9 to 5, 9 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
Then just spend some time doing some physical. Either I play something or doing some exercising.
Mm-hmm.
And towards the evening or night, spend some time with family. And then yeah, night is for my personal research, reading a bit, maybe
Mm-hmm.
watching a TV show and then crashing. Not
Okay.
not much these days.
Mhm. If you had, let's say, a few months of time by yourself, what application or side project would you build?
So my dream project for many
Mhm.
years has been to use AI to control or to limit crime,
Okay, interesting.
locally or
Mhm.
globally.
Mhm.
I've never really gone deep into it, but
Mhm.
if at all someday I find myself having a lot of free time available, I think I would work on some project, some way to solve or reduce crime in the world.
Interesting, interesting. And what are your go-to resources for absorbing what's happening latest in the domain?
It's mainly X, formerly
Hmm.
Twitter. I think,
Sure.
as most people say, the machine learning party is on Twitter.
Right.
I think a lot of stuff, lot of the latest things are being announced there.
Right.
A lot of
Yeah.
discussions happens there. There are a lot of sources, but I
Mhm.
still, for me, that's, I mean, just having that single one is like good enough. Just follow the right people, the right sources. Let X's recommendation algorithm do the rest, and you will get all the content that you want.
Interesting. Great. And what does a ideal weekend look like for you?
Weekends are quite relaxed. It's mostly spending time with family and my daughter, my 1 year old daughter.
Mhm.
She's growing up fast. So I think
Mhm.
these are the times to enjoy, spend with her,
Yeah.
take her out, meet
Mhm.
some people. Obviously, until she grows up, starts schooling, then it becomes
Yeah.
a different
Then
routine.
it's different.
But
Yeah.
right now, I think most weekends are dedicated for her.
Sure. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Ron. Great catching up, and look forward to having you again. Uh, in, I don't know, maybe in the next year again, depending on what's going on. But thanks a lot.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Always happy to be. I would say even if you don't say, I say that I call myself part of the analytics with their family.
No, it has
So
been
yeah, happy to be part of all these different initiatives, events, content, and community in general.
sure. Okay, thanks a lot, Ron.